tonight. It's a race against the clock for first responders.
My mom told me she heard some creaking. It woke her up. She didn't fall back asleep. Obviously she didn't think the building was going to fall, otherwise she would have left.
I'm thinking we're racing against the clock because the rest of the building is going to come down. I realized that when I opened the door, and then what I'm thinking is, if I start to feel something come down, how do I jump on my daughter to save her?
It's day 3 since a condo collapsed in Miami, Florida. More than 100 people still unaccounted for. And there are more questions than answers. But how did we get here? We'll break it down. Plus,
it's difficult to see anyone lose their freedom. But seeing somebody lose their life through torture over 9.5 minutes is incomparably worse.
former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin gets a historic 22.5 years for the murder of George Floyd. What this could mean for officers who find themselves on the wrong side of the jail in the future. BNC Live starts now.
And we're following it. Breaking news this hour, standing by for a press conference happening right now in Surfside, Florida. Let's take a listen.
And we're coordinating their services, chief among them Jewish Community Services, which also operates the 211 helpline here with licensed clinicians, and they specialize in trauma and grief counseling. Also our Community Action and Human Services agencies and Juvenile Services Department. Those are county departments with our own licensed psychologists and social workers on the scene assisting. Florida Blue has also offered to assist, and we've set up a grief hotline. That number is 833-848-1762. Again, 833-848-1762. Among many, many others who are stepping up and helping us. I just wanted to say how very, very moved I am, and all of us are, at the incredible outpouring of support that we have received right here in Surfside from all across the globe in the midst of this incredible tragedy. We know people are feeling this, they're feeling connected to us. We feel your support, we feel your love and compassion. This has truly shown us how interconnected we are as a world, as a global community. So on behalf of Miami-Dade County, I just want to say thank you so much to the entire world for stepping up and holding us in the palm of your hands. Thank you so very much.
Gracias. Thank you, everyone. And now for Creole is going to be Ivan Morso.
And you've been listening to a press conference in Surfside, Florida, an extremely difficult task for first responders. They're working around the clock to rescue survivors of the deadly condo collapse. A lot of fear about what's next. Right now, we know there are 156 people still unaccounted for and 130 people accounted for. It's unclear of how many people are dead, but at last check, at least 5 people, we were told in that update. Stick around. We'll have much more coming up on this heartbreaking story after a short break. Welcome back. I'm Brittany Jones. Well, topping the news this half hour is the latest on the deadly condo collapse. We are learning of an alarming new report detailing major structural damage to the Champlain South Tower. We found out that engineers actually sounded the alarm 3 years ago on the structural integrity of the building. BNC correspondent Astrid Martinez is live from the site of the collapse with the latest on this tragedy. And Astrid, this report is also raising many questions like, did they see this coming?
Correct. There's so many questions that are angering and frustrating families who have loved ones that are missing.
So he will get used to that. And obviously he's a small dog. He can go over the rubble, very agile.
Now, we also talked about the fact that this organization travels to disasters around the globe. We talked about the possibility of rescuing and survivors here in the rubble. He says the first 72 hours are definitely crucial, but he or no other human being can really put a timeline on life, that it's up to God. It's a miracle, and this community believes in miracles, and I know that's hope is a word that everyone is hanging on to here. Brittany?
Yes, as Senator Marco Rubio put it, he said prayers are needed, God's grace and mercy. Thank you, BNC's Astrid Martinez reporting live for us in Miami. Well, a 2018 report warned of design flaws to the condo, which was built 40 years ago. Now, Craig Dowdle is with me now to talk about this. He is an assistant director of security and crisis management. Craig, good evening and welcome to BNC.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
We are happy to have you with us, too, to talk about such an important story, such a heartbreaking story. And so, Craig, there are a number of buildings along the beachside, and this structure has been up for 40 years, as we just mentioned. In your expertise, what would cause a building to come down like that?
You have to understand the foundation of the building. As the building is built, you have to look at the base of the building as far as how the weight is transferred from the upper floors down to the lower floors. And as that weight transfers, it's going into the ground. Therefore, stabilization takes place by the foundation, and then it is built up, and it supports the weight from the top down to the bottom and into the ground.
Wow. I mean, it just reminds you, people have said, like witnesses, that it looked like the Twin Towers when they were struck on 9/11.
Correct. With the Twin Towers in 9/11, the same thing happened. The weight, it begins at the top and then is transferred down through each beam into the ground. With the World Trade Center, understand that building was built differently. Each floor was 1 acre. Each floor did not have the same interior structure as this building here that we're looking at that collapsed. It had an exoskeleton like an insect. Everything, because of the 1 acre floors, 110 stories, they had to put all of the structural beams on the outside, with the only thing interior for its core was the stairwells and the elevator shafts.
Well, Craig,
Two different types of structures.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess, when people look at the amount of rubble that we see on our screens. Well, you talk about the condo owners. They filed a lawsuit in 2015 regarding cracks in the outside structure. Condo owners typically pay HOA fees, which cover the cost of maintaining property. Should those fees have gone toward fixing the property?
That I would have to defer to some type of legal counsel. I couldn't really answer that question directly.
Okay.
I don't want to say anything that would be wrong.
Well, when you look at just the structural design of it, and just how Astrid just mentioned in her story about the things that were in those reports ahead of time, is that something that typically people should take very seriously when it comes to looking at these warnings that happened in the past?
You should always take any type of report seriously, especially when you're talking about structures and people inhabiting these buildings. If there's something that is structurally unstable, it should be dealt with immediately.
Is there anything that you know from your expertise what homeowners should do if property managers aren't taking action to address structural issues?
That should go back to City Hall. Mainly, this is where the Bureau of Buildings comes into play. They're the ones that gives the certificate of occupancy on these buildings. So residents should always go back to their local representation, their elected official, to press an issue to have something repaired.
And so moving forward after this, what would the next steps be in the building investigation look like, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the next steps would be, after they have finished the rescue and concluded this operation, it'll be turned over to legal and to all the experts dealing with building inspections. They're going to look at all the permitting. They're going to look at complaints. They're going to interview the residents. All these things will take place to come to some final conclusion as to what caused this catastrophic failure.
Well, Craig, we know tonight there are more questions than answers, but we appreciate you for weighing in on this tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And stay with us. We have much more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to BNC Live. Families of the victims of the condo building collapse in Miami are right now hoping and praying for the best, as well as everyone else across the country. But while they're waiting, it's taking a toll on their emotions. Our mental health and wellness expert, Jane Marks, joins me now to talk about this. Jane, good evening. Unfortunately, we're talking about something that is very heartbreaking tonight.
Absolutely heartbreaking. You can't imagine what everybody's going through. You watch the officials going through their whole series of emotions, and then you've got victims there that possibly could be alive and are still praying that somebody's going to somehow rescue them. Then you've got family members who are waiting, and first responders who are ready. They're hyper vigilant, ready to do their work, but they can't.
Yeah,
because they don't know where the victims are.
And so talk about that. Talk about the anxiety. I mean, they're going into a building. You don't know if it's going to continue to collapse, if something is going to follow on them as they look for these people to see if there are any survivors. You have the families who are waiting outside of the building. What type of things are they experiencing in terms of anxiety going through this?
My sense is they're probably experiencing the full range of emotions. You know, not just shock and vicarious anxiety or an anticipatory anxiety, fear, nausea. You know, people who are prone, those family members that are prone to anxiety are just scared to death. You know, what the research says, Brittany, is that it is so much more difficult waiting for the news as opposed to hearing the finality of it, because we're waiting, that anxiety, what's going to happen, what kind of news are they going to bring us. If they knew exactly what was going to happen, what was happening, they could bring it to closure. Without that, it is just sheer for them. For a lot of people, it's just sheer horror. And then for those of us watching, you know, again, we're secondarily experiencing that.
Yeah, and I mean, also, you look at, we mentioned the first responders. There was a doctor who also mentioned that he sees a number of things in the trauma center, but now his mom is missing in this. He says he just wants his mom back. When you're waiting at a time like this, what should you do to kind of calm your fears?
Well, to calm your fears, you know, hopefully you're talking to others who are experiencing the same things that you are. You know, of course, the best distraction for just waiting is distraction itself, some sort of immediate distraction, you know, whether it's listening to music, talking to other people, just somehow getting outside of your head, returning to normal activities. Anything that's going to make us feel a little bit more in control. Because quite frankly, this whole situation is so out of control, so unexpected, so traumatic on so many levels. And you know, it's not that we've had a year where we haven't been experiencing traumas already. So here we go again, and for the family members, this is up close and personal. You know, so it's a very, very frightening experience, but with help. And the nice thing that we did here, Brittany, was that they have a lot of specialists there waiting to help them. There are mental health providers there. They talked about clinical psychologists, first responders who are trained in this. And so hopefully, you know, as a community, they're going to get through it together.
And what type of lasting effects? I mean, if you had to take a guess, you know, when you see something like this, you step aside of just the family, but you look at the folks who are watching this at home. All of us are watching this unfold, our correspondents who are out there. What type of lasting effects of trauma would this have even on us, mentally, emotionally?
I think when you have witnessed this so many times, for a lot of us, we're experiencing emotional numbness. You know, certainly it's the secondary shock. But after seeing this over and over, now we're talking about day 3. You know, this is for so many, you know, again, reporters and first responders, right now they're numb. There's going to be, in some cases, delayed shock. And so for those people who are likely to experience delayed shock, you need to make sure that you're paying attention to what your functioning is like. You know, how is your sleep? What's your concentration like? You know, how are you feeling? Is this time for you to check in with your primary care physician or even a mental health professional? And remember, they're there. Use them. Take the time to use them. That's one thing we've learned over the last year and a half. You've got to use these mental health supports. So this is a critical situation, and the unfortunate thing is each time we develop a new playbook for how to manage these traumas, and once again, we're at it again. We're developing a new playbook.
And Jane, so put yourself, you know, in any of these family members' shoes. They're standing outside. They're waiting to hear what they hope is the best of news, right?
Absolutely.
And you're going through this mentally. How do you just kind of turn off the noise?
I think a lot of people will turn off the noise through being hopeful and prayerful. This is a time we look to those resources that you've used historically to get through these very difficult times. It's hard to accept that, you know what, my loved one is not going to be here any longer. You're going to remain hopeful. And I think those who remain hopeful are going to get through this in a much easier fashion. If you're looking at it from the standpoint that, you know what, my loved one is dead, you look at the worst possible scenario, the anxiety is just going to increase. You just want to wait. If you can just pack your patience if you can and say, whatever this outcome is, I've got to be prepared to manage this. And if I can't, I've got to reach out to others to help me do this.
What will the following days look like for those folks if this search, because first responders said that, you know what, we're not stopping, we're going to keep going until we try and find every single person in that building. What will the days look like coming ahead?
The days for some people, there will be exactly what I was talking about, not only secondary shock, but delayed shock, and that when this occurs, or when this happens, or when they get the final word on what is going on with their loved one, then they'll be able to process it at that point. I think for first responders, for them, we're talking about months from recovering for something like this. Just as when they were witnessing the multiple deaths, during COVID. You think you've got it on, you think you handle it, and a lot of people will. Don't get me wrong. Some people are doing everything that they can to be able to manage this kind of shocking stress on a regular basis. But we're going to have to look at mental health from an entirely different perspective, because we're just bombarded with these images, week after week after week. It doesn't seem to let up. And so, so much attention needs to be given to mental health and research and the things that can happen to help us manage these extraordinarily difficult times.
Yeah, and Jane, lastly, it has to be scary, right? For any of us watching, you live in a building, you have your home, but anyone else who lives in an apartment building like myself, you start to wonder, is it safe?
Is it safe? That's a good point. I think everybody's going to be anxiety prone. After each one of these kinds of events, we start paying attention to what our surroundings are. Are we at risk in these situations? And each one of these acute situations teaches us a different set of lessons. So to that extent, it is normal to experience anxiety. To that extent, it is normal to want to go back and research your circumstances and your risk. It is normal to take better care of yourself after a situation like this.
Yeah. And lastly, Jane, any message you would send to those families who are dealing with this trauma right now? I know they want to hold on to some type of hope.
They want, I would say hold on to hope to the extent that you can. But again, right now, for me, the best piece of advice is patience and prayer. Those two, this is the time to pivot to those things that have held you in good stead for a long time. And, of course, we always talk about, taking care of yourself and returning to normal routines if you can, but try to do so, because the more you return to normal routines, the more you will feel like at least there's a little bit of control in your life.
Awesome advice. Jane Marks, thank you for joining us, for letting us know the latest on the mental health. And our wellness expert, Jane Marks, will be right back after a short break.
Those afternoon showers and thunderstorms, and by the time we get to the middle of the week, we're dealing with more moisture, Brittany, and more thunderstorms for them.
It just makes me think about the fact that it makes it more difficult for the first responders out there to be able to search. And right now, it's a race against the clock.
Yes, it's a race against the clock. They're dealing with the showers and the thunderstorms. They have to make sure that they stay hydrated. It's hot, and they're also dealing with Florida humidity, Brittany.
Yeah, that is a lot. Well, thank you, Brittany, for that update. We'll keep our eyes on that weather out there as well for their search. And stay with us. We have much more news coming up after this break, weather and sports as well. Stick around for our next hour.